Max Blumenthal is the oracle in the United States. The Grey Zone is the must-read and watch every single day. He's an author, he's a journalist, and he's an editor at the Grey Zone News. Max Blumenthal, welcome back. Been a few weeks since we saw you, but what a few weeks they have been. Your take, first of all, on the ignominious parade of the Seven Dwarfs. But these Seven Dwarfs seem to have some impact on Trump's rhetoric, at least, if not his intentions. What do you think it all meant?
Well, they were first the seven babysitters to prevent another embarrassment for Zelensky. They referred to themselves as the coalition of the willing, which is the derisive term for what was essentially the coalition of the billing, all of the vassal states that the George W. Bush administration bought off to join the invasion and assault on Iraq, which France did not participate in. And now they've accepted this. And what they're seeking to do is inject a poison pill into the negotiations and take Trump along with them. And they're using some kind of demand for an Article 5 type security guarantee for Ukraine in the event of any settlement, which would mean the continued NATOification of Ukraine, even if it is formally blocked from NATO accession. And it would then take on the role of a kind of Taiwan, a continued porcupine state, with some territorial concessions that would allow NATO troops to operate on its territory. And I think it set the stage for another conflict. And at the same time, Trump has refused in Alaska, any talk about further economic cooperation and sanctions relief for Russia. So there doesn't seem to be any carrot to entice Russia into accepting that stick. But the Europeans, their main role is, and they're not just the Europeans, the role that they're taking on is also representative of the transatlantic faction in the Beltway foreign policy establishment, the Democrats, the Jake Sullivans, the Blinkens, these figures. Their role is to steer Trump towards increasing pressure on Russia rather than moving toward an actual settlement in the name of supposedly stopping the killing. And so I think, given the progress Russia's making on the ground, I think this is going to continue for some time, the war, that is.
What was all the bonhomie Alaska for, then? Is it all to take our minds off the Epstein affair, take our minds off the Gaza genocide? I mean, what was the point of meeting and appearing to find important common ground with the Kremlin when it's plain, as you've just described, the basis for a settlement simply doesn't exist? I mean, quite the contrary.
Well, there are different factions in the Trump administration. I mean, you had Keith Kellogg, the liaison to the envoy to Ukraine, who's been clearly on the neocon side. Lindsey Graham, who golfed with Trump just before the summit. Then you have the Vance faction, J.D. Vance, Elbridge Colby below him, a lot of figures in the NSC who really want to see a settlement in Ukraine. I think they genuinely want to stop the killing, but there are also imperialist priorities there. They do not see the U.S. as, they're not interested in the U.S. getting bogged down in Europe. They're also less interested in the U.S. getting involved in a conflict for Israel with Iran because their eyes are on the real prize, which is China, Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, the real conflict looming on the horizon, which is right now an economic competition but could turn into a hot war, and they want to prepare all the U.S. vassal states that have encircled China, the Philippines and Japan, which recently have engaged in sort of bilateral military ties we've never seen before, to be the front line of war against China. So that I think there are competing factions in the Trump administration, and to the extent that the Vance faction can win out, Trump is going to have to some extent, decouple from Europe. The Europeans cannot do without a continued conflict in Ukraine because it will cement not only their own irrelevancy, but the irrelevancy of NATO in the North Atlantic. And they can't have that. That's why Mark Rutte was front and center among the seven dwarves.
It would be entirely understandable, indeed, from my point of view, entirely welcome, if Trump said to them, well, we're out of here. If you want to continue this war, you'll have to do it yourselves with your own money, with your own men, and your own ships and materiel. That would then allow the European public opinion to bring itself to bear on the seven dwarves that lead them and say, well, we're not actually sure we want to do that. But Trump seems to be half in, half out to me. He, at one and the same time, is treating them in quite a derisive way, but accepting, if you like, or conceding their key demand, namely that they can still dream of this Article 5-like security guarantee, because you well know anything that's Article 5-like is NATO membership, even if they don't get to wear the badge.
Yeah, I mean, this requires some level of personal commitment from Trump to see through, and he said there will be no NATO for Ukraine. Ukraine was never going to be allowed to accede to NATO. It never was. It was just dangled before Ukraine so that they would fight this war to weaken Russia on behalf of their puppet masters, and as along with EU membership. And then you have no U.S. troops on the ground, no U.S. boots on the ground. Keir Starmer has said he would have boots on the ground and planes in the air, and then just a week ago he said he wouldn't. Can the UK even defend itself against a band of mercenaries like the kind that tried to topple the government in Venezuela a few years ago? I mean, at this point, what even exists of the UK military? Can the EU actually defend Ukraine against deeper Russian push? Can NATO defend it? I mean, it would certainly be disastrous for the continent, but I don't know. It would ultimately come down to the U.S. putting boots on the ground and the U.S. getting involved. And Trump needs to really decide, is he going to go with Europe, or is he going to give a carrot to the Kremlin to actually be able to make a deal? And it's going to be painful for Ukraine either way because of the military situation. We need to also zero in on the situation on the ground around Pokrovsk, which is a key hub that cuts into the northern Donetsk fortified cities that are the heart of Ukraine's defensive doctrine. Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. If Russia gets past these cities militarily, and it's making progress, and Ukraine has had to send in much of the Azov regiment to patch holes in their defensive lines, and their drone defenses are not as effective as they were. If they're able to do that, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much a wrap for the Ukrainian military, because beyond there are no fortifications. The terrain becomes much more amenable to a Russian push. And that's why Putin is asking for that territory in a deal in exchange for freezing the lines around Zaporozhye and Kherson. And so you're getting this total resistance from Ukraine and the Europeans, and they're trying to inject a series of poison pills. But Trump, if he wants a deal, he's going to have to accept the military reality on the ground before it gets even worse for Ukraine.
The Belarusians are threatening to enter the conflict if Zelensky does not accept the proposal that Russia and Donald Trump, he says, have made to Zelensky. We've not yet seen exactly what that proposal looks like, but Zelensky surely does know it, and the Belarusians know it, and they are very close to Kiev, geographically, of course. If the Belarusian army were to move into the conflict, they'd be in Kiev in a day and a half.
Well, we saw at the beginning of the so-called special military operation, Russia sent what was effectively an expeditionary force into Ukraine. It's like 80,000 soldiers. And what you really needed, if Russia was actually intending to take Kiev, and was a force of about 250,000. It was essentially trying to force Zelensky back to the table at the point of a gun. It was supposed to lead to some kind of deal in Istanbul that would end the process of NATOification, lead towards maybe neutrality in Ukraine. It failed because Boris Johnson parachuted in, convinced Zelensky to sabotage, to give up on the Istanbul deal and take massive shipments of offensive weapons. The Javelin missile systems proved pivotal in doing great damage to Russian armor in the Kiev Oblast, and they were pushed back. And Ukraine's military, they're a very, very effective military, but we're not at that point now. We're almost 3 years down the line. Ukraine's military has been attrited to the point where they're basically bringing in third stringers who cannot fight in close combat, who do not want to fight. The Ukrainian society, according to a recent Gallup poll, has completely flipped on the issue of continuing the war. Only 25% of Ukrainians actually want to continue this war. I think most of them are working for think tanks on K Street in Washington. Over 70%, close to 70% want a ceasefire. There isn't a kind of army that can repel another Russian push. And if you bring Belarus into the picture, the manpower problem that Ukraine faces will be further exploited. So this is negotiating leverage for the Kremlin. And, I hope we don't have to see that. I hope there's a deal before then, particularly for the Ukrainians.
Now, Max, you mentioned the factions in the American government. Are there factions in the Russian government? Because of language and other difficulties, we never quite see, but somehow sense that there is a body within the power circles in Russia that long believed that Putin was too naive, as he said himself he had been, that Putin was prosecuting the war with too soft velvet gloves, and that these kind of negotiations, we've had Alaska, are we ever going to see a second round of talks? Is Budapest going to happen? Other factions fighting inside Russia, do you think, over minimalist and maximalist positions?
Well, I think I'm in safer territory when I talk about factions in Washington, where I live, and I'm getting further outside my field of knowledge when I talk about factions in Russia. But for sure, the faction that has won out at this point would be, in a sort of Western sense, the more hardline faction. I mentioned the defeat in the Kiev Oblast that Russia suffered in the beginning. The initial defeat in Kherson, where it wasn't even the Russian military, it was like a collection of Russian SWAT team members who had to flee across the Dnipro River. And, they've recovered there. And Putin subsequently replaced his defense minister, many of the higher commanders, and has kind of accepted the reality that there's not anyone to talk to on the other side. And if they're going to bring Kiev to the table, it's going to be with serious force. And that is why this summit took place. The summit took place because of Russian military victories and the weakened state of the Ukrainian military, the demoralized state of Ukrainian society, their lack of appetite to fight, the fact that young, teenagers are resisting Ukrainian press gangs to take them into the slaughterhouse, and the vision, the longer-term imperialist vision of a faction inside the Trump administration. So the material outcome of the summit in Alaska is very difficult to assess. It doesn't appear that Putin got what he wanted. For example, economic cooperation discussions about ballistic missile treaties, which would be great for humanity. But he did get a seat at the table, and this has been something that the transatlantic faction and the Europeans have been trying to prevent, just seeking to prevent Russia from ever having a seat at the table in negotiations. And so that in itself was a huge victory for Putin, as well as Putin and Trump coming together on U.S. territory. One of the main reasons, as Stephen F. Cohen explained, the late, great Stephen F. Cohen, for the concoction of the Russiagate conspiracy theory was to criminalize diplomacy, and he called it Intelligence Gate. And I think we finally moved into another phase where, for example, in The Guardian today, if you read an analysis by Luke Harding, who was seminal in disseminating the Russiagate hoax, wrote a whole book called Collusion, but never demonstrated collusion in it, walked out of an interview with Aaron Mate where he asked him to back up his thesis. He's written an analysis on why Trump and Putin met and why their relationship is improving seemingly. And at no point did he even attempt to claim that Putin was somehow manipulating Trump through some payment. He's just forgotten about the whole Russiagate narrative. So I think we're at least in a better place politically and historically, but the preponderance of neocon power on Donald Trump, as well as the Europeans, has obstructed any material progress so far.
Max, if you've got the time for me, I've got one last question, and it's a segue, not easily made, but one that is occupying a lot of interest over here. This bizarre story in Las Vegas, where a big tech guy who apparently is the IT chief of Benjamin Netanyahu was caught in a police sting trying to have sex with children. And the others were all booked and given a court date, but the Israeli guy pleading in aid, his connections to the FBI and the NSA and the CIA, was allowed to walk predictably all the way back to the safe haven of Israel. What on earth is going on with that?
Well, I wish we could have dedicated the whole show to that, because it's such a wild scandal. It feels almost like Epstein 2.0. Tom Alexandrovich is a key figure in Israel's cyber intelligence directorate, which is maintained by the office of Benjamin Netanyahu. His name was unknown to the public until he was booked in Las Vegas. He had, according to the Jerusalem Post, received an award last year for participating in the assassination of Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah through some technological innovation. Wow. So he's an important Israeli cyber spy, and he got caught up in a sting, a federal multi-agency sting, in which an agent posed as a 15-year-old girl and asked him through a dating app called Pure to take him to take her to Cirque du Soleil and bring a condom, essentially saying, we're going to have sex and I'm underage. And he agreed, and they arrested him. 5 other men were arrested as well. In his interview, Alexandrovich revealed that he was in Las Vegas to attend the Black Hat cyber security conference. He was meeting with FBI agents there, meeting with NSA officials, and he had more meetings set up. And he said that he was desperate to get back to Israel and was deeply embarrassed and couldn't stop thinking about his family there. So he said, in no uncertain terms, that he was a flight risk. Yet his passport was never surrendered, and he was allowed to flee. The State Department issues a very unusual statement declaring that it had no role in helping him abscond from the country. And then we learn that the U.S. attorney in charge of Las Vegas and Nevada is an Israeli citizen named Sigal Chattah, who is a fanatical anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim racist who is installed as an active an acting U.S. attorney by Donald Trump because of her lack of qualifications. She would have never survived a confirmation hearing. 100 judges and lawyers have issued a letter declaring that she's unqualified. 2 days ago, this is totally unprecedented for a U.S. attorney, she deleted her entire personal Twitter account, ostensibly because it was so infested with anti-Palestinian genocidal rants calling for the slaughter of everyone in Gaza. She called for her opponent in the 2021 Attorney General's race to be hanged and compared him to a member of Hamas, and he happened to be a black man. And she campaigned during that race as an Israeli. Her campaign ad was actually called Israeli Born. And now she's on the defensive and is struggling to explain how she let this top Israeli cyber spy flee the US. No one else was allowed to flee who was caught up in that dragnet. And she's blaming liberal local prosecutors. So we have a real scandal on our hands, but it speaks to a larger phenomenon in which the Trump administration has adopted a kind of two-tiered system of justice, of crime and punishment, where not just the powerful and the wealthy, but, for example, Zionist Jewish college students or Israelis like Tom Alexandrovich seem to be given carte blanche to do whatever they want, while the political enemies of Trump, whether they're Venezuelan door dashers or Palestine solidarity demonstrators, are brutalized, criminalized, and humiliated in the streets.
Well, a cloud no bigger than a man's hand can be a harbinger of a great storm to come. As soon as I saw this Vegas story, I thought immediately of Epstein. I made the point, actually, on Twitter that Trump needs this like a hole in the head. Does this scandal have any room to grow, or will it just peter out?
It has a lot of room to grow because it's sort of like the Epstein files. And the Epstein files are, everyone is talking about it still because Trump promised that they'd be released, did not release them, and then got every member of every Republican member of Congress to leave early for the summer recess to avoid voting on a Thomas Massie Ro Khanna bipartisan bill that would have called for them to be released. So they all leave early, and then what is the next thing that Trump does? He orders a federal invasion, military invasion of Washington, D.C. This is the distraction. And what are they doing? They're roughing up, immigrants delivering food and humiliating people in the streets. No one wants them here. It's a complete distraction. And there are protests growing in the streets. And if you just take a close look at those protests, every other sign is about Jeffrey Epstein. And then this other scandal emerges with an Israeli U.S. attorney letting an Israeli abscond who's a pedo spy. We still haven't gotten a sufficient explanation about how this happened, and it may go to the top. Why do I think it goes to the top? Because who controls Las Vegas? Who owns the biggest casino in Las Vegas? Who's the biggest donor to Donald Trump? One of the biggest donors in U.S. political history, who also happens to be one of the biggest donors to Benjamin Netanyahu. It's Miriam Adelson, owner of Sands Casino, Sands Las Vegas. Her husband, Sheldon Adelson, owned that. And they fund the Israel-American Council, of which Sigal Chattah, the U.S. attorney, is a member. So is there an Adelson connection? Because I know for a fact that Miriam Adelson has gotten on the phone with Donald Trump and basically told him what to do on many occasions. Just yesterday, Donald Trump was on the Mark Levin show, this Likudnik carnival barking radio host, praising Benjamin Netanyahu as a war hero. Do you think Trump really sees Netanyahu as a war hero? No, he's just following the script that's been given him to him by Adelson. So I think Netanyahu called his own network in the United States in to get one of his top cyber spies out of the country. And this is a scandal that goes to the top.